Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Roli Books Instagram page. We're going to go live in just a moment with Vir Sanghvi, who's hopefully joining us right now. And we are going to be discussing the role of India, COVID management and preparedness in this. So we're hoping that he joins us in just a minute and we take it from there. And there we are. Good evening,
Finally.
Veer. How are you?
Hi, Ma.
Yes, finally. How are
Yeah.
you?
Fine, Ma. How are you?
Good. This is an experiment, so we're hoping it goes well. This is the Roli Books Instagram account, and we are in conversation about India's response to what they can do, how they can support the state, what is the state's level of preparedness, etc. on this. So, Veer, very good evening to you. But let's start off actually by asking you what you make of these various offers that have come in. We've seen the Tata Trust make one of the largest contributions, about 1,500 crores towards looking at how to increase capacity for hospitals and infrastructure on COVID management, followed by several of the other industrialists. Anand Mahindra actually was the first one to make that offer as well, about repurposing his manufacturing plants to make ventilators. So what are your views about all these offers that have come in?
Well, obviously, they're very encouraging and they're a step in the right direction. The Adanis, I think, have also promised a lot of money. The Ambanis have spoken about building a hospital. It's not enough, of course. It's the Tatas who really set the ball rolling. But we need much more than that. We need much more than corporate contributions from large groups. We need individual companies to do something. For instance, in the case of the Tatas, in addition to the money that they're providing, the Taj Group of Hotels, at least the Taj in Bombay, is going to people who are working on the front lines, to health workers, giving them meals, giving them food. I think it has to be a little bit more than just corporate donations, which is part of CSR. It has to be actual help on the ground. And it has to be personal donations. Akshay Kumar gave 25 crores of his own money. Most of these guys are worth billions.
That's right.
I'd like to see them take their wallets out.
The big question is, we also saw actually one Maruti come forward and say that it was going to set up a ventilator production in its biggest plant. Are we ready? Do we have the engineering? Do we have the skills to do something like this?
Apparently, I mean, I'm not a technical person, but apparently the ventilator stuff is not difficult to do. We have the capacity, we know how to do it. You just have to empty industrial capacity and make people do it. As of now, if we are to believe the government, we are still in stage 2. So ventilators are not necessarily a huge priority. But we're going to be in the situation, if we don't act quickly, we're going to be in the stage 3 situation where ventilators are desperately needed. You have a situation already in Italy where doctors have to choose if there are 100 ventilators and 1,000 patients, who do you give it to? We're nearly getting to that situation in New York. So if that's happening there, can you imagine what it'll be like here? So we have to think a step ahead, and ventilators is obviously the right thing to do.
So, Veer, one of the sort of big ticket focuses of a crisis, a pandemic, is always what the biggest industrialists are going to do, because they are the wealthiest amongst all Indians. They have the financial resources, the infrastructural resources to kind of contribute towards helping the state be prepared. But there are lots of other smaller industries. There are, textiles that maybe can get into making masks, for example. There are pharmaceutical companies working on we're also one of the biggest manufacturers of the malaria prophylactic that everyone is talking about as a potential treatment for this. But masks, sanitizers, pharmaceuticals and medication. It's not just the ventilators and the setting up of the hospitals. I mean, there are lots of other ways in which to contribute as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly controversial view on that, Maya, which is that I believe the smaller business person, the professional, the ordinary family are much more willing to do charity, much more willing to help people in need than the big guns of our society. It's always struck me as odd. that in America, when people made lots and lots of money, they gave most of it to foundations, to charities, which is why you have things like the Rockefeller Foundation, for example.
Yeah.
It's not true of India. In India, when people make a lot of money, they go and build places of worship. They try and glorify their own name. We don't have as much of a charitable tradition as we should.
How do we change that? I mean, we're too far down the
Yeah.
road, I think, for some
Yeah.
change like that to happen, though, right?
Well, I think it's changing. I remember many years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I interviewed Nandan Nilekani. And as you know, he and his wife have given away hundreds of crores in charity.
That's right. They actually
And
have.
and I asked him why he did it. And he said that in developing countries, when people make a lot of money very quickly, it isn't because they're necessarily better than the other person. He gave his own example. He said, I was just in the right place at the right time when when this whole internet thing happened, and therefore I was able to benefit from it. So I have an obligation to give back to society. I mean, those were golden words, and he's delivered on them. But how many industrialists have you heard talking like that? It's always this feudal, I am rich, so I will give you. People don't necessarily feel that they have an obligation. The exception always has been the Tatas.
The Tatas. I was just going to actually come to that because, I mean, historically, they have had, the Tata Trust, they've given scholarships, they have the endowment, various different arms of that, that one family, actually. Why is it you feel that other industrialists of that generation as well did not branch off into more philanthropic pursuits?
Well, I'm sure there's a complicated answer which somebody will give me one day, but the short answer is meanness. I don't think they felt obliged to do it. We still, I mean, in America and in many Western countries, philanthropy in the Nandan Nilekani sense is seen as an obligation towards society. In India, it's still seen as a big favor you're doing the poor.
Well, this also kind of begs the other question, and one of our I guess viewers, they've joined us, Instagram followers have joined us right now, and they're asking this one question of whether, given the kind of pictures we've seen since this lockdown was announced of the migrant labor moving in these, large swathes of humanity back to their villages on foot, should industrialists have kind of stepped in? And I guess the follow-up question to that is, it's good that they are stepping in wherever they can, but what also then is the responsibility of the state?
Well, on the question of migrants, there's no doubt that the state has acted irresponsibly. The lockdown was imposed without any consideration of what would happen to these people. Many of the people who have gone off and are walking home are delivery boys, for instance. There are people, because I cover the restaurant sector, there are people who are waiters, delivery boys, who see nothing for them in the last 2 months, in the next 2 months, 3 months. There were a lot of these guys were assaulted by the police. So the gloom and the doom that there is has caused them to go. So I think, first of all, we should have expected that. Secondly, we should have treated them better. And thirdly, I mean, all of us in the media face a certain responsibility in that when it happened, most newspapers, most television channels did not give it the kind of importance it deserved. It was bloggers, people on social media who actually rang the alarm bells. So all of us in some level, you and I as individuals, the government and industry have failed. In the case of industry, it's slightly more complicated because you're told, say, there are 500 people walking near your area. You're also told you're on a lockdown or a curfew. So what can you do? Can you send people? Can you not? So the government, I think, must unfortunately bear the brunt of that responsibility.
Also, you mentioned restaurant and the kind of restaurant workers who've been going back. It is interesting because these are places that can ostensibly at least help in the kind of relief operations. We've seen, as journalists, we are essential services. So we've been able to actually go around and see some of what's been going on. But, I've come across actually individuals, just individuals, with bags of like a care package with water and a juice and some fruit and nuts and things that are high calorie items and handing it out to these people you're seeing walking down the streets. So shouldn't restaurants have kind of stepped in and done something about that? I mean, it's counterintuitive that they're telling their own staff that they can't take care of them.
Well, restaurants are in a bit of a mess at the moment because most of them are trying to keep paying their staff, at least their permanent staff. They keep having to pay for rent, all of that. So the outgoings are the same. It doesn't look like there will be any money coming in for at least a month. Even if the lockdown does end on schedule, there is talk that restaurants won't be allowed to open. So they're trying very hard to stay afloat. Many of them have tried to open, as has happened in England, for instance, delivery services, takeout services, which the government has now allowed as a way of paying salaries to their people. So what I've done as much as possible, I've been trying in the last few days to review takeout places, to write about what they're doing, only so that these guys have some money coming in. But we've had all kinds of problems. We've had problems because many of the people I ordered from couldn't deliver because the cops beat up their delivery guys. You've also had sort of idiotic comments on social media saying, how can you think of food at a time like this? But I mean, A, everybody has to eat. B, if you're going to eat, try and help somebody make a living. No?
That's right. And in fact, on this issue of food deliveries or helping distribute food and in the form of relief, I think Zomato has done quite well on that front, from what I've been reading and hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that the restaurant industry, it seems to me, has stepped up. Zomato, Swiggy, everyone is doing whatever they can. But you're inhibited in what you can do because there is a quarantine, because you send delivery boys out and they're assaulted. It is not my position that the whole government is like this. I'll give you the example of Savir Saran, who's a very well-known chef, who runs a restaurant in Gurgaon. He wanted to give food to the elderly, to people like that, which he would prepare and send out for free. And no delivery boy in his area was willing to deliver it, saying that we'll get beaten up again by the police. So finally, Savir and his friends went to the DC, the cops, and at a senior level, they were very understanding. And now that delivery is happening. He's delivering food to hospitals, to primary healthcare providers, to all of that. But he had to go all the way up to get that kind of permission. It shouldn't be like that. So restaurants, therefore, are trying, but it's not always easy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, food is, of course, important and it's an essential. And so we're seeing these conversations, a lot of them take place around food. But perhaps a reason for the fact that they've been focused around the delivery of essential supplies, the delivery of food, is because, the medical crisis perhaps hasn't quite hit the fan yet in the way that one anticipates it might, or the government is anticipating and trying to preempt. But what can smaller companies do? We've seen the Ambanis talk about setting up that COVID-specific hospital in Mumbai. We're seeing these big industries talking about, manufacturing ventilators, or perhaps creating a supply chain where they can import material to assemble them at least, or something like that. But what about smaller companies? What do you think they can do, really?
Well, they can always give money. They can always finance community kitchens. They can finance shelters. They don't cost that much. If, say, 5 companies get together and say, we will arrange meals for these homeless people or these migrants who are running away because they think there's nothing for them in the big cities, it's not a big effort. It just requires a certain amount of organization, a certain amount of cooperation from the government. And I think that will happen. It's already started happening, and that's a good thing. We talked about the Tatas and all, and charity. I made the point about Nandan Nilekani. I should have included Azim Premji, who has announced that who's giving the bulk of his wealth to charity. That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see people not doing CSR expenses from their large industrial groups. I want to see people taking out their own wallets.
Right. So, I mean, one of the questions, just coming back to food, because it's an interesting question. I'm actually monitoring the kind of feedback we're getting from some of the followers who've joined us. One question that someone named Samir Khair is asking is whether or how one can ensure that in the food business and the food delivery business, that the proper sort of precautions, COVID precautions are being implemented. Do we rely on frozen food players in such a time, or how are safety management systems in place in small restaurants and takeaways and things like that? Do you have any thoughts on that? We'll come back to the other conversation.
Yeah, these are conversations that people have had all over the world because all over the world, the takeaway sector is the only one that survives at the moment. From what
Hmm.
we've read, and remember that medical information on COVID changes from day to day. From what we've read, the transmission is never by food. What you
Hmm.
must pay some attention to is the packages. Yeah,
Right.
it's possible that the virus survives on cardboard or whatever, but there are ways of handling it. You try and keep the packages far away from you. You get rid of them thoughtfully. Once you've touched the packages, you wash your hands with soap,
Hmm.
and try as much as possible to heat the food again before you eat it. You should be okay. In the UK, for instance, where the takeaway sector is the only one that's surviving, in fact, I've read of no complaints at all of any kind of transmission through food. In
Hmm.
Bangkok, similarly. So I think there's a bit of this whole business of don't touch newspapers, you will die. There's a bit of
Yeah.
needless paranoia going around at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know in Delhi, I live in one such area where sort of residents' welfare associations are becoming slightly vigilante and have decided that
Yeah,
even if newspapers are deemed okay,
yeah,
the society is just not letting the delivery folk come in
yeah,
and do
yeah,
their business, or the cops are harassing them at the depots in the morning when they go and pick up their stock. I mean, there are lots of different kinds of stories coming in.
yeah,
But, there's one follower who's asked a very, very important question. And we're talking about, India Inc. is not just big business. It's also the economy, the state of the economy, where we're
yeah,
going from here, the bigger picture. The lockdown and the fact that there are harvests that are happening right now.
yeah,
A lot of these people who are trying to go back, if they can't earn a living in the capital, are going back to work as farm labor
yeah.
at this time. So what's going to happen to, for example, all the wheat crop that's standing in the fields? I mean, this is agriculture is also the backbone of our industry, our economy, and things like that. What happens? I mean, the bigger picture as well.
Yeah, in fact, agriculture is one sector that hardly ever gets talked about because
Hmm.
even assuming that these harvests happen, that they manage to get the crops out, the whole delivery chain, the supply chain, and the third point is that most farmers in this country are poor. They send people out to the cities to make money and send money back to them. If those people who are supposed to send money back to them also arrive in the villages, there simply isn't enough food, isn't enough money to go around. So
Hmm.
agrarian distress, which we've heard a lot about, is certain to increase no matter what happens, sadly.
So agrarian distress increases. India Inc. is diverting resources towards COVID management and preparedness right now, presumably all with significant tax breaks as well at this point in time. But, a pandemic, a health epidemic, we hear health experts, public health experts, epidemiologists all over the world talk about how something like this is kind of a whole of society approach. It requires a whole of
Yeah,
society approach and solution. The state cannot sort of divest itself of any accountability or responsibility. It has to figure out what it can do by itself, and communities also have to do their own
yeah.
thing and participate. So, in the context of states, I mean, I don't know if it's in the ambit of this conversation, but nonetheless, it's a question I'd like to ask you. We saw when the Prime Minister announced the lockdown. At that point in time, he announced a 15,000 crore package towards COVID relief. Unclear about where the government is going to allocate that expenditure, and then they've set up that PM Cares fund where we've seen the Adanis, for example, contribute money, and Akshay Kumar, whom you mentioned, etc. Those are kind of longer term approaches. And that 15,000 crores is sort of welcome and necessary. And yet you have other bigger expenditures that the government is incurring at the same time. Perhaps that should be shelved for the moment and that money diverted towards public health. Because our public health sector is really the weakest link in the chain.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think we have to reorder our priorities. I think
Hmm.
public health now comes completely at the top. And if this means taking money away from other sectors because there's only a finite amount of money to go around, then of course it needs to be done. There's a second problem, which is that industry will give money perhaps, or
Hmm.
perhaps it won't. So far, some of them have given money. But the economy as a whole was already in a bit of a bad way before this
That's
started.
right. Yeah, that's
So
right.
the government has to help business and the economy get started again. It has to give them something that allows growth to return, to resume. And I'm not even sure the government, though it has the best intentions, is seized of that at the moment. There is just so much panic and so much of a crisis that cynics will ask, if you couldn't get the economy moving when there was no coronavirus, how will you get it moving now? It's a question we haven't really answered.
So who do you think that question needs to be answered by? I mean, we don't seem.
The government, surely. Yeah.
And is there any work towards that? Because we're hearing that the government is consulting different groups of experts on different aspects of how to manage this, whether it's the economic impact, the public health impact, the data gathering that's taking place, and which arm, which body of the government is going to come out there and take questions? One of the biggest issues actually has been this inability to ask clear questions and get clear answers about where and how this allocation is going to take place.
Oh my, you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. You will know that how this government differs from other governments is that
Yeah.
while there is no shortage of announcements, there is very little taking of questions. So, yes, we would like to ask these questions. We'd like to get specific answers, but that is not in the nature of this government. They will come and tell you that things are okay, and you say, hang on a minute, you said this is okay, but was it really okay? And nobody of any consequence will answer questions like this. There are questions about the lockdown, for instance. I don't
Yeah.
think anybody doubts that the lockdown should have been done. There may be questions about whether it happened too early or too soon. In my view, it happened too late. But was that necessary to go on television at 8 o'clock and announce a lockdown that night? It wasn't
Yeah.
demonetization. You could have announced it, say, 2 days in advance, given these migrants a chance to decide what they wanted to do, let people get ready, avoided panic. These are questions that, I mean, there may be very good answers to them, but these are questions that nobody can ask anyone in authority because no answers are forthcoming.
Yeah, well, one of the big criticisms of the way this lockdown was handled was the fact that you gave the public 4 days notice for the Janta curfew and to come out and applaud health workers at 5 o'clock on the evening of Sunday the 22nd, and you gave 4 hours notice for a much bigger sort of
Yeah.
lockdown or curfew or whatever you want to call it. Two comments that have come up as well on this is. One on the money for the Central Vista. Can that be, sent towards COVID management? Because is the Central Vista redesign a priority? The other the other comment that one of the followers has raised is on this whole, the lockdown, as we were saying. You say that the lockdown is important and it came too late. What planning could have been different, according to you?
Well, I think anybody who's coping with, about the Central Vista, let's get rid of that first of all. That's a no-brainer. I mean, it's a useless dud scheme. It should be scrapped, coronavirus or no coronavirus. We spend too much money on vistas and statues. We should be spending money on the people of India on getting the economy going again. In terms of what could have been done with the lockdown, if you had announced it 4 days earlier, then people would have prepared better. There would have been kitchens set up so that the poor could eat. There would have been shelters set up. There's absolutely nothing. You tell people, please don't hoard anything. Supplies will be easily available. There is no danger. And then you announce a lockdown with 4 hours notice. People panic. They panic because they've got nothing at home. You've told them not to keep anything at home. And then when they try and get stuff delivered, they're assaulted. Or the people who are delivering things are assaulted. The supply chain is broken. Many shops don't have essential commodities. So yeah, if you wanted to say could it have been better handled? Of course it could have been better handled.
And I mean, just to press that preparedness and planning a little more. I mean, today we've seen some extremely disturbing images coming in of the way some of these migrants. I mean, I don't know why we call them migrants. Actually, they're Indian nationals. They're not like illegal migrants. I mean, they're just migrant labor. They go from one place to another, but they're being sprayed down with disinfectant by local police authorities. What is going on exactly? Because I really have no other question to. I don't know what it
When
is.
we
Yeah.
say disinfectant, we suggest that they're spraying Dettol on them or something. They're not. What they're spraying is industrial bleach, which has terrible
Which is even,
consequences for
yeah,
your health.
exactly.
Yeah, which they're actually poisoning their skin in many ways for spraying this on them. And it's happened, we know, in UP. I've had seen tweets from people in UP saying it's happened
That's,
before in other states as though this is some kind of competition. But in a way, it shows the contempt that the administration has for the common man. What's becoming clearer and clearer these days during the riots, during this coronavirus crisis, is that this is becoming less and less of a country for the poor. It's a
no, on
country
the,
for the rich who are doing okay, and the poor seem to have no rights. They seem not to be taken into anybody's calculations when they plan things like this. Policemen, government servants treat them like dirt. It's something that should concern all of us because there will be payback one day.
right. So, I mean, on the one hand, you're saying that, this government is saying this is for the public of India. The lockdown is in the public interest. It's in the interest of the public. You want the community to also be involved and spread this message. And on the other hand, you're seeming completely, as you said, uncaring towards vast, percentages of this population. Do you think there's going to be some action against these administration and police officials who are actually allowing this kind of thing to happen?
As far as I know, the guys who were seen on video throwing bleach on people have been suspended. There was also a video of a policeman in Delhi indulging in all kinds of brutality. He's been suspended, but that's too little, too late because the atrocities go on. The message has not gone out that this will not be tolerated.
So, I mean, if we do a comparison or a comparative of what's happening, say in Italy or in the United States now with India, the numbers that we see, the spikes, the curves that we talk about all the time, the percentages of death because
Yeah.
of the coronavirus. We're studying these numbers on a daily basis. Here, of course, we've had no clear data from the ICMR for the last couple of days on a simple
Yeah.
thing like testing. But do you think that we can ever be prepared for something like that if it were to happen in the country?
Yeah, I don't see why we can't be prepared for epidemics. We've had epidemics. Admittedly, this one is worse than the others. And we've been lucky. It seems to have come to India later than it went to, say, Italy. Certainly much later than it went to China and other countries in the Far East. So, yes, we had time to prepare. We had time to put emergency measures in place. And we have done it. But I'm guessing we did it at least a week too late.
Why do you say that?
Because I know people who in the early days of the screening at airports came through. One person who I won't mention came through Bombay airport from an affected country. He was shepherded into another area where a guy asked him, "Oh, do you have fever?" So he said, "No." Said, "Chaliye." He went off. So it's very nice to say in theory that so many thousand people were tested or whatever. But there wasn't any proper testing. Sometimes there was thermal screening, which tells you if people have. I don't think it was. I think we started too late.
And we're still not doing enough testing, to the best of my knowledge.
I don't think we are, Maya. I don't think we are, Maya. I mean, it's again one of those tricky questions because they say they didn't. It's now improved because they've got the private sector involved. They don't have enough testing kits and they want to test people who have symptoms. So that's the argument they're offering. And they're saying you can't really do that much sampling of the population at large because our population is too vast. So I accept that there is a problem, but there's also the reality that because testing is so limited, I'm not sure we can trust these figures.
But also, I mean, what we had in the beginning was that, there was no question of anyone testing you if you didn't have direct travel history yourself or
Yeah,
contact with anybody who had travel history. We
yeah,
don't know if the guy who's got on the metro with us has traveled back from Iran or Italy or the
yeah.
United States or wherever. So, and, I mean, that itself to me seemed a little odd to have such restrictions on even the fact that you could test. But why did it take so long, in your view? Speaking of the private sector, to get private labs to sort of begin testing? What was the resistance in your mind?
I don't know. I was hoping you could answer that. I could never work out why private labs were not allowed to test. Yes, there was a problem getting test kits, but private labs offered to arrange this themselves, to organize test kits, and the government said, no, we will control this. Only, not even all government hospitals, only certain government hospitals. In Delhi, I think RML was one of them. I don't think AIMS
Yeah.
was testing, will do it. I
Safdarjung
mean,
was testing. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
it's mystified me when you know that there is a potential crisis like this knocking at your door.
That you
Surely
have
you
just
test
52
as much
or,
as
yeah,
possible. Yeah.
55. Yeah. No, I mean, that's interesting. And I
But
also,
listen, I've talked enough. Maya, I've talked enough. What would you have done differently? What would
I
you
mean,
have done differently?
I would certainly, I think, have opened up testing to the private sector. If they can do,
Yeah,
swine flu tests and H1N1 tests and dengue and malaria and whatever have
yeah,
you, I don't see why they can't do this. I mean, they're a valuable contributor to the public health sector as well,
yeah,
because at least those who can afford to get their own testing done are doing it. Also, what upsets me about the testing is that if this is a highly contagious disease, and somebody potentially is a carrier, do you really want them going into the Safdarjung emergency room or OPD to say, hey guys, I want to get tested for coronavirus? Is there some way of making sure that that kind of testing happens in an isolated space? Are there allocated areas in hospitals where such patients are going? I mean, we're hearing even sort of mixed reports and reports of some concern. I saw something from Hyderabad, for example, about an isolation ward where there's
yeah.
nobody except two patients who they've dumped there, and they're cut off from everything else, and it's not hygienic. I mean, that video is quite alarming. But I can only imagine.
I've seen, yeah.
Yeah, and at the best of times, we know the state of our government medical hospitals or our civil hospitals and districts. We know how strapped they are for resources, for beds, and we know the hygiene levels in all those places. So I cannot understand the resistance myself. I would have definitely done that. I would have said that the lockdown needed to be phased out a little bit, that you identify what are potentially hotspots. So if Maharashtra, the numbers are rising, let's try and see if you're going to lock down particular places in Maharashtra. And then, I don't know. I mean, this debate has been going on in the United States as well, because
Yeah.
there's this whole question about locking down the entire country or just the tri-state area and California and Washington and places like that. But I think that's something that I imagine one would have done. It would have been nice to be able to ask that question of our government. But I mean, the health minister has not given one press conference, Veer. I don't know what to make of it. And we're
Well, that's
seeing Boris.
the cabinet minister has actually not been seen very much.
Yeah.
The week ago, the minister of state was seen. He appeared on television and said that all this too much was being made of this. You needed to spend 15 minutes in the sun, and it would kill the virus. So that gives you an example of the level of thinking that went into the planning.
Yeah, I also want to ask you, since we are journalists, and every evening we watch the international channels and we see world leaders come out and address their own national media and take questions face to face. What is the resistance from our side? I mean, you've got a joint secretary from the health ministry. God bless him. He's doing a great job every day fielding those questions. But why isn't sort of a political leader who the country obviously looks up to not coming out to, I guess, ease tensions a bit? In fact, I found that 8 o'clock lockdown announcement quite alarming. I think it created a kind of panic in its own tone that could have been avoided.
Yeah, one of the advantages we have is that we have a leader who is popular, as two elections have shown us,
Yeah.
whatever his critics may say. I was thinking the other day, if, say, Manmohan Singh had been Prime Minister and he'd appeared on television, would he have been able to reassure people in quite the same way as Mr. Modi can? And the answer clearly is no. I think Mr. Modi is much more effective as a leader. He's much more respected by many in many parts of the country and by many people, and therefore he had the moral authority. On the other hand, would it have been handled so badly if Manmohan Singh had been Prime Minister? Would more thought have got into it? I don't know. I just begin
It's
to
hard
wonder.
to say, yeah.
It's hard to. It's like demonetization. That I don't doubt. I mean, the logic of demonetization was crazy, but I don't doubt that they had time to prepare for it, and yet they didn't even worry about what size of note fits into which ATM or whatever. So there is, I think, in the government of India, I imagine this is true of all governments, a certain level of stupidity, which in retrospect we always find astonishing.
We're coming back to the question of the economy. We've seen sort of the announcement of a stimulus package in the United States.
Yeah.
What kind of stimulus package do you think we would need here? And how much of that, once again, is something that's going to come from the government or is going to be sort of in collaboration with the private or the corporate or the manufacturing sector? I mean, how do you think that's going to play out?
Well, I'm not an economist, Maya, but one thing people have said to me is that inventories have piled up. There is no buying power in the market. There is no demand. People don't have confidence in the future. They're not buying anything that costs above a certain amount of money.
Right, right.
They're just holding on to their money. If the economy is going to be revived, you have to give them confidence. You have to increase demand. You have to make them feel that you know what you're doing. And so far, sadly, over the last year or so of this government, it's not been clear that it knows what it's doing. There's been a budget which is incredibly unpopular. There have been all kinds of reversals of policies. You need somebody there who tells people that things will be okay. We accept that COVID is a problem. We will get over it. We faced other challenges. Go out and spend. You will earn money. Don't worry. And so far, that confidence does not exist.
So if the need of the hour is to kind of rebuild that confidence in our economic future, what do you think the corporates we've talked about at the beginning of our conversation, the ones who are kind of stepping up and talking about what they are willing to contribute or do in sort of for COVID management, do you think any of them will emerge as sort of leaders who might be able to infuse some enthusiasm? Because the economy is also a lot about public mood.
Yeah, I wonder, because we really don't have a tradition in India of business leaders being great inspiring figures to the people at large. We've always been, perhaps unfairly, slightly suspicious of business leaders, and business leaders have stayed away from this confidence building role. The IT sector, which in many ways changed the way in which Indian businessmen function, we've talked about Premji and Nilekani, could have taken on this role, but it hasn't taken on this role. In fact, it's moved slightly to the side. We don't hear so much about it any longer. So I don't see businessmen being able to do it. And let's also not forget that when we talk about businessmen and we say they should spend money on COVID relief, etc., their ability to spend also depends on how well their businesses are doing. If their businesses are staring at disaster, and if you talk to any businessman off the record, he will tell you how bad things are. There is a limit to how much they're willing to do. So there's a chicken and egg situation which goes beyond COVID, as terrible as it is, and has to do with general confidence in the economy. If there is no money to spend on anything, then there won't be enough money to spend on COVID.
Right. So I think, one of the questions is that if that's the case and there's going to be, we have the jury's out basically on where this is going to go. I mean, I don't want to use the term positives or the upside, but really, in a sense, work cultures have changed across Indian offices in the last week to 10 days. Do you think work from home will stay post-COVID?
Yeah, I think it will, because many people have managed to stay at home and work well. But it's one of those things that's, I hate to use this term, classist, because if you live in a small house in which you have one bedroom and your children sleep with you, etc., you're not eager to stay at home. You want in some way to get out. You want to be able to do something else. For the upper middle classes, yes, I think it will change. For a new emerging generation of people in tech jobs who can do them on a computer, it will change. But for the bulk of India, they have to get out of home. Their homes are not large enough or nice enough to fit them in all day, 24 hours.
Right. So it's a matter of privilege, I suppose, is what you're...
privilege is like a big word, a buzzword today. All I'm saying, it's a question of how big your house is and what kind of job you do. There is no
Everyone
one
doesn't have that's right. Also, you hear a lot of people who... I guess at some level, we all believe that this lockdown was important planned differently perhaps, but social distancing, or rather, I mean, it's physical distancing and social interaction. I think the wording is all kind of off on that one.
Yeah.
But the you hear people say, oh, there's wildlife back on the streets, the skies are bluer, you're hearing birds chirping every morning, there's obviously less cars, less emission, hardly any aircraft in the sky, things like that. Do you think it's going to sensitize industrialists and the private sector to also again think more consciously about the environment?
Well, that's wishful thinking. I don't think. I think industrialists will be just so desperate to make money and get their industries back on their feet. They'll actually flout environmental laws, and the government will support them, saying, "Perhaps they're doing so badly. What hope is there?" But one thing you said about birds chirping. Have you actually heard birds chirping? One of the things I've noticed in Delhi in the last 2 days is that the birds seem to have disappeared.
Oh no, I have plenty around. I live next to a park, so there's
Yeah.
plenty. I've actually spotted.
Well, that's
if I can,
unfair. No, the rest of us are not so fortunate.
yeah, no,
We
I
don't
know.
live
But if
near
I can
parks
actually
or
tell
scenic
you,
locations.
it's really,
Yeah.
it just happens to be the neighborhood park. But I've spotted a red-whiskered bulbul, an Indian grey hornbill, a brown-headed barbet, a purple sunbird, and there's one more. There's a green pigeon. Would you believe it? Have you ever seen a green pigeon? A yellow-footed green pigeon.
No, I haven't. But here's my question: how do you know so much about all this stuff? How can you identify so many different
It's
birds?
called
Are you a
a
birder?
book called. It's called. Well, I mean, not really, but I love nature. So I have a book called Birds of the Indian Subcontinent, and I've
Yeah, I've
had
seen
it
the
for
book, yeah.
years. Yeah, I've had it for years. I used to keep it, with me in my bag every time I would be out on shoots and things like that, in case I would identify something. So now I have a ready reference book. I just see a bird, I click a picture, and I go back to my book and I open it up, and I sound like I know it all as a result. But it's
No,
really
but
because
so
of that
therefore,
one book.
in your view, birds are fine, right? There's many more
Yeah,
birds,
I
and
mean,
you're seeing lots.
I'm hearing them. I mean, again, these are sort of apparently birds that are native to the subcontinent and this belt.
Yeah.
But yes, I've heard people talk about how, especially as you go outside the sort of chaos of Delhi and you go to the outskirts. Some people are saying sparrows are coming back. The sparrows is a big thing around the city. But
Yeah.
I have heard those reports. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm surprised that
I'm
you're saying you
reassured. I'm
haven't.
reassured. No, I
I'm
mean,
sur-
I'm not fortunate enough to live next to a lovely park where there's the golden winged barbet or whatever. I live in South Extension. We only
brown-headed
see,
barbet.
sorry, the brown-headed barbet. I only see crows and pigeons, and they're not around, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the green pigeon. Since you're looking out for pigeons, look
Okay.
out for something called a green pigeon because it hides
Okay.
really high up in the trees. It's a very shy bird, apparently, according to this book. I'm just telling you everything that I've read.
Yeah.
But that's what it seems to say. But
And have you seen
it's
green pigeons recently?
yes, I saw one 2 days ago,
Okay. All right.
day
Okay.
before
I will
yesterday.
check with
But
you the next time.
yeah, so I think that's what the question was about environment. And
Yeah.
you're also kind of getting to know your neighbors because you're standing on the balcony every evening because you can't go anywhere, and interacting with people, so there is a sense of community that's also building
Yeah.
up a little more. But this idea of sustainability, we've seen different initiatives from the government in the
Yeah.
past 4 to 5 years, whether it's on renewable solar energy, whatever else have you, ethanol, things like that. I mean, are you really saying that you don't see something like this and the impact it's having try and make industry rethink?
No. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be so negative and so cynical, but I don't think industry will pay much attention to the environment. Most of Indian industries had no record of paying any attention. All kinds of effluents go into our rivers. All kinds of polluting gases are let out into the atmosphere. Our environmental record is very bad. I don't think because people like you and me, well, you more than me, are sensitive to our environment, these guys will change their attitude. It's sad,
Right.
but it's the brutal
Yeah.
reality.
We're just getting a couple more questions in from people who
Okay.
are joining this live chat. One of them is asking, I think I asked you something similar a little while ago, but you can just repeat it for their benefit, is a comparison of how American industry has responded and how Indian industry is responding. I mean, and also the idea of the Defense Production Act in the United States and things like that. So your views on that? Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think I made several points about Indian industry and American industry. One is American industry has a tradition of philanthropy, that rich people in America like the idea of giving people money away. Many of them feel that it's an obligation to do that. I don't think Indian industry, sadly, with the possible exception of the Tatas, the IT industry, and a few other people, has the same sense. Second, while I don't think there's any doubt that Donald Trump is a buffoon and he completely misunderstood the nature of the threat, he even at one stage called it a democratic hoax. There's no doubt that once he realized it wasn't a hoax and it would imperil his re-election chances, he got industry involved. You remember that press conference in the Rose Garden, I think it was the Rose Garden, at the White House certainly, where he had heads of various companies coming and talking about what they were doing. He made it clear that the government and industry would work together. And he answered questions about that. In India, we've made no attempt to do that. I've seen no press conference, well, actually, I've seen no press conference at all, but I've seen nothing where, say, a senior government official appears with industry and says, we're working together. American industry also, much before us, diverted a lot of its production to doing things that would help with the COVID virus. And that's not true just of America. In France, Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, because it wasn't selling any cosmetics or doing anything, said, never mind all this, let's just do something good, and made sanitizers.
That's
in India,
right.
Diageo, the big liquor company, which is sadly a multinational, not a really Indian company, was the first one to say that we will donate alcohol for sanitizers and we'll divert production from our factory, we'll divert production capacity and make sanitizers. I haven't seen that many Indian companies show that kind of imagination, that kind of willingness to step forward.
So I guess the corollary to that is that, while US companies are stepping forward, or international companies are stepping forward, the United States has something called the Defense Production Act. We've heard Trump talk about it a lot, and about how the government can actually press industry into manufacturing essential commodities in that time of crisis. Do we have something like that to fall back on at all if we require it to do so?
Honestly, I don't know, I'm not lying, but from what I have read, we are now using the Epidemics Act, which is an old act, which permits government to do much what 1897, but it permits governments to do pretty much what they want to. So yeah, the government, I think, could compel Indian industry to do it. And often in India, you don't need a law to compel industries to do what you want. You just get the CBI to register a case, and he does what you want.
Okay, well, we have a couple of final questions I think we'll take, which is that one asks, do you think that COVID would have garnered as much global attention had it not spread at this time and in the kind of places it did? Because, I mean, in November 2019, when the first cases came out in China, one was kind of not reacting in this way to it. I'll let you answer that, then I'll ask you the second question.
No, I think there's no doubt that had COVID not spread to Europe and now to America, it would not have got that much global attention. It would have been treated like SARS was or bird flu was, as a Chinese problem.
And do you think that, given what we're hearing from the global community about, Chinese lack of transparency, is there going to be some change in the global order that you foresee once we come out of this tunnel that we're in?
No, I mean, I've read all the analysis about how people will not trust China and China has lost out. But it seems to me that most people never trusted China or its figures anyway. So I don't see how that's different. And from everything we've read, even Wuhan, where it now appears that 42 to 46,000 people died and the Chinese just lied about it, appears to be getting its act together. So the thing about a tyranny or a brutal dictatorship like China is not only can it lie to you, but when it has to get its act together, it knows how to get its act together. So will we like China anymore? Will we trust China anymore? No. But will this mean that China has finished its world power? Oh, absolutely not. I don't think
So,
that will change.
Veer, there's a couple of corollary questions to that. One is, what do you think that will mean for Chinese investments coming into India? That's a question one of our followers has asked. The second is a question that I have, because I saw something on international media about how the Chinese managed to control the spread of the epidemic, or to do this lockdown, and they're monitoring very closely. But there is a mass gathering of big data that's taking place. Your facial recognition softwares, thermal screening software, your phone is tracking your temperature every day, things like that. And that's all going into a centralized government database, which is great when it comes to controlling an epidemic, but has extremely worrisome ramifications if it falls into, the wrong hands.
But it means always been worrisome, even before this epidemic. From the time you entered China, there were always cameras that were always looking at streets, checking on every citizen. If you were to visit China tomorrow, I don't suppose you would in the present climate, but if you were to leave in a week's time, they would be able to show you footage of almost everything you did. That's how great the surveillance is.
Right. Okay. And the final question that I'm going to throw at you from one of the other comments that we've come in is, what you think are the best and worst case scenarios for timelines before life can come back to normal. And I'm going to throw in there saying life coming back to normal is not only about us being able to get out of our homes, but also, international travel resuming, and just life as we know it in this digital age.
It's a difficult question to answer because it depends on the numbers. If the numbers keep increasing, as some people have said, then I think it'll take a very long time for life to return to normal. If, however, we can control the spread of the epidemic, then I see the quarantines and all of that easing by the end of next month. I see some amount of restrictions still. I don't know if restaurants will be allowed to stay open. I don't think cinemas will necessarily be allowed to stay open. But I don't see the economy reviving till November, December in best case. So life will not return to normal, I think, till next year.
Well, Veer, on that somewhat pessimistic note,
I'm sorry.
we will end this conversation. But let's do this again, because it's been a first for me to do a kind of chat
for me
Roli
too.
Books, and it's been great fun. So I think we really should do this.
I was supposed to plug my book. They kept telling me that's from Roli, but I forgot to even mention it. It's called Men of Steel. It's one of their great bestsellers. Do buy it when the bookshops open.
So before you go, who is going to emerge as the Man of Steel at the end of this? Do you have a guess?
Well, my guesses are always different from the voters of India's guesses, so I won't suggest anything.
Right. Okay. All right.
Okay,
I was meant to plug a book that I'm co-authoring.
So go ahead. I can ask you questions about it if you want.
It had nothing to do with this topic, which is why I was hesitant. But I have sort of co-authored Jenny Housego's memoir. She's a textile historian, an English textile historian, who revived the Connie Shawl, the Kashmiri handloom Connie Shawl. Very beautiful. She's also John Singer Sargent's great niece. So she kind of started with the revival of the shawl that he had painted on a European woman way back in the 19th century. And
when does this come out?
Well, it was meant to come out sometime in the next couple of weeks, but we have had a delay because of the lockdown.
Sure.
Let's see how that goes, but we'll send you a copy when it's done as well.
Right. And maybe Roli will ask us to have another chat about it when it's
absolutely out. That should be fun. But thanks a lot for chatting, Veer. This was great.
Thank you, Maya. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Take care. Cheers. Bye.